Here's maybe an advanced Dungeon Master concept. Take your characters, throw them back in time through different editions. Maybe it'll be fun. Let's check it out. So this idea came to me through a confluence of events within a campaign that I started in 2016. The MacGuffin of the initial campaign was a box, and I hadn't really decided what was in the box as the campaign began, but there were some other things that I'd thrown in there, Umber Hulks, and therefore Neogi came to mind, and the characters fled from a town that was attacked by a Neogi death spider. They didn't necessarily know this because they were already running far, far away beforehand because they're good PCs and they get the hell out of there when the shit comes down. So they traveled through some forest and into a dungeon and then eventually found themselves in a tower that was displaced in time-space, in its own little pocket dimension and therefore not visible unless the owner of the tower wanted to be. They became the owners of the tower, and inside this tower was a seafaring vessel. However, it was an old spelljamming ship that was parked there on rigs. So they had this box that they had acquired before they fled the town from someone who had been a treasure hunter. And it took them quite a while before they finally figured out how to open the box, or they tried, they failed, and they just ignored it until a later date, and then tried again, and eventually were successful. Inside this box was the Ultimate Helm. Now, the Ultimate Helm was a magic item from 2nd edition that would give the user the ability to basically pilot any spelljamming vessel, whether it had a spelljamming helm or not. And it was connected to the Spelljammer, which is this mythological ship that has, it's the size of a city, and it's traveling somewhere, and no one really knows where it's traveling or why it's traveling. But also, it's probably alive. So I decided that that ship had after the events of things that had happened in 2nd edition, had come to my world, Koteta. The original Spelljammer novels, up there, started on the Dragonlance campaign setting with a character named Teldon Moore, who acquired the Ultimate Helm, and he traveled throughout different spelljamming worlds and learned things about wild space, and eventually got to the Spelljammer. So I figured he had brought the cloak there, and eventually the Spelljammer would make its way to my world. So the characters have the Ultimate Helm and are able to take the ship that's in their tower to another continent that's close to the continent that they were on. And while there, they did a bunch of other things and left the ship off the coast, no longer being able to fly because he had the Ultimate Helm with him. And the crewmen basically were given the ability to use the ship to, acquire things on their own and trade for other goods while the ship wasn't in use by the main characters. So eventually, after a long period of time, the main characters come back to the ship at an agreed-upon time and place. And as they are traveling back to their main area, they decide to take a detour because some of the NPCs had mentioned this strange, ghostly island. And that's all that it really was. It was myself having the NPCs talk about various things to the PCs and mention a bunch of things. And this strange, ghostly island caught their attention, and they decided they wanted to go there. I had no idea what was on this island. This is kind of a thing that happens in Dungeons & Dragons. You decide that there's a bunch of things you're going to talk about, and you're going to say some things, and they're random things to you that are meaningless, but the players can be meaning to them, so then they're going to go there, so you got to figure out what's there. So what was there in the next session, as they travel towards it, was what I decided was a new type of creature, or specifically a new type of ghost, a Chrono Ghost. And this Chrono Ghost was created somehow. I still haven't really decided how a Chrono Ghost comes to be, but I imagine it has to do with certain magics being used in the world at the time that this ghost is turned into a ghost. And it could be high magics or some cataclysmic event that basically imbues this ghost with powers of manipulating time, or at least sending people through time. And now you have a ghost, and why are they a ghost instead of going on to one of the many planes of existence in the afterlife? It's because they have unfinished business, and often ghosts with unfinished business have been murdered or killed in some way that is unjust, and so they seek justice, and they generally force non-ghostly people to figure out this justice for them. So this Chrono Ghost basically stalked them through town and eventually confronted them, and instead of, having a battle and them being forcibly thrust through time, the PCs themselves negotiated with the ghost and agreed that they would help the ghost out. So it was just before this part, when they confronted this ghost, that that I decided that something interesting was going to happen, and the session ended at this point. So I was able to think about it over the next week or two before the next session started. So I decided that in addition to going through time, which was going to tie into sort of the history of the world, but very, very small local amounts to that area, but would give maybe a couple of clues to other things that had happened in the campaign. And that spelljamming would be involved, that there would be someone working on a spelljamming helm by contacting the arcane, the people who often sell spelljamming helms in wild space. So I decided it was so far back in history, and I kind of look at my world as one of the first worlds that was in the D&D multiverse. So this person was creating one of the first spelljamming helms. So by the time the session came, I decided that it would be really cool, because I was driving a truck around North America. I'm a truck driver, and just this idea of not only were they going through time, but they'd also go back in time to an earlier edition. And because my friends and I started in the mid to late 80s playing, first edition, but mostly second edition, I decided to send them back to second edition. And they'd be playing characters that they had played back then. Now, back then, each of my friends and myself, when we played characters, we often just named them the same names over and over again. And we played Dungeons & Dragons in a different way than most people, I think, in that every day we just made a new character, and it was at whatever level we all just collectively agreed to play at. So it could be level 1, which was rare, level 20, equally rare, mostly around level 10, sometimes 5, sometimes 15. And sometimes they would just have starting gear. Sometimes the gear would be magical items that one would have acquired during that time. And it was all kind of collectively agreed upon and balanced, and everyone got kind of the same amount of stuff. And then we would do it the same thing the next day, because for us, character creation was really fun. We would sit around, bullshitting with each other and talking for over an hour, sometimes 3 hours, making these characters, and play for sometimes a shorter period of time than it took to create the characters in the first place. Now, as I said, my friends would name their characters the same, generally, and so would I. My character was Rico Roquez, and this came about because when I was in elementary school, we had a new French teacher, as often happens in Ontario. The old French teacher gives up on the class and goes somewhere else, and some new French teacher comes in. So when that teacher on the first day went through roll call, I just didn't put up my hand when she called out my name. And then at the very end of it, she asked if anyone's name hadn't been called, and I put up my hand, and she asked me what my name was. And the first name that popped into my head was Rico Roquez. So from that point on, that's how she referred to me. And, for the next couple weeks to a month, there'd be questions like, where's this Kevin Newman person? Has anyone seen them? Are they okay? That kind of thing. And I was the class clown, so I would, if I ever did something in class, which was often, and get reprimanded, and she would say, Rico, sit down, or something like that. The other kids in class would laugh because they knew it wasn't my name, but she would get upset and say, don't laugh at him because his name is different. And this was amusing until a vice principal sort of blew the whole thing open and revealed that I was actually Kevin Newman. So that's how Rico Roquez came as my character. My friend, Chris, his character was called Zeke Zethemeyer in a similar fashion to, in fact, I think his name, Zeke Zethemeyer, was what influenced me to go with Rico Roquez, because he had this idea that he just wanted to be at the end of roll call at the beginning of this, when this year started. So over the summer, he came up with the name Zeke Zethemeyer and decided that would keep him at the bottom of the list of roll call. And for whatever reason, he just didn't like being in the middle. So he became Zeke Zethemeyer, and that influenced me to think of Rico Roquez connected around roll call. Now, my friend Sean had read books by Raymond E. Feist, and they're his favorite fantasy series. And one of his favorite characters in that, if not his favorite character in that, is Macros the Black. So always named his character Macros the Black. And then there was my friend Chad, who liked the Forgotten Realms books. And I think this is before Drizzt Do'Urden stuff started to happen, or maybe around that time. But the books that he had read up until that point weren't Drizzt books. And there was a character in it named Tristan Kendrick, and he would name himself Tristan Kendrick. So each of these characters on this island in the past, in second edition, were named after those characters. Rico Roquez, Zeke Zethemeyer, Macros the Black, and Tristan Kendrick. So when my friends, I went to the map and revealed it on Roll20. Originally, it was a map of a derelict town that had mists and that sort of thing. And then I just had almost basically the exact same map, except now it was bustling with people. And now they were in the past. And I actually had to have them go from one campaign instance to a new one, because the new one was running under the second edition rules. And it was fun to reveal to them that now you're playing second edition. What I didn't realize was how much I guess I had forgotten about second edition. So later on, when they're running, it took me forever to figure out movement in second edition, which is 12 inches. And I'm like, I don't even know what the context of that 12 inches is, other than obviously it was based on moving miniatures and using tape measures. Whereas now it's 5 inches, but that's based on a square. So it took me a bit near the end when they're running away from the guard to figure out how to deal with this running away. Other than that, it's pretty much the same, except that you got to remember Thaco, but once you've remembered Thaco, you kind of never forget, because it's weird and confusing and fun. So the idea of this whole thing came about as they were playing. I knew it was going to be sort of a murder mystery, because I just wanted it to be a one-off that would take 1, maybe 2 sessions. One of my friends prolonged that a little bit by taking exception to the idea of the simple plot. And it was just a simple murder mystery in which the prince is building a spelljamming helm in this underground lab and contacting the arcane through, some sort of interplanar communication. And the bishop from this church that is a foreign church has learned about this, thinks the prince is contacting demons, and wants him to stop. The prince obviously has the power and then threatens to say, well, your church will be expelled from my regions if you just don't let it drop. So the bishop hires an assassin to kill the prince, and under the cover of fire. And it's up to the PCs to help solve the mystery and figure out who killed the prince, because it's actually blamed on the baker, who is eventually the Chrono Ghost. So they eventually do figure it out, and they get to the underground laboratory, and they see this finished spell jamming helm and notes and all this information. And then they reveal what had happened, and that is the justice the Chrono Ghost was seeking. So they're sucked back into the present, into 5th edition, and of course, they then go to that underground lab in this now, abandoned island, and the Eons have preserved this spell jamming helm, which they take, and the notes, and any other little incidentals that they had left behind. And I just thought it's a fun little one-off thing that anyone could throw into their campaign. Just with the Chrono Ghost alone, you can send someone back into the past and figure out just a little one-off thing, a murder mystery, trying to find some MacGuffin for somebody. Any little thing that only takes 1 or 2 sessions, as long as you don't have someone trying to prolong that because they want a more detailed plot, because it was just supposed to be a little one-off diversion, because you're in between 2 points in a campaign that you haven't quite figured out how to connect, or the players themselves are a little listless and they haven't decided what they want to do next. So you throw them into that. And also because you mention something at random and they want to do it. So you then create that thing because they want to do it. You're not discouraging them to go to places and discover things that you didn't even know were part of your campaign. And then you can add things that do connect to your campaign, like, for instance, this spell jamming stuff, because they were only at the very beginning of learning about spell jamming. So it was nice for them to be able to get a helm to put on the ship so that it wasn't required one character to wear the ultimate helm, that any magical person using magic could operate this vessel while the PCs were off doing whatever it was that they were doing. And this idea of the Chrono Ghost is kind of cool, because you can send them back into the past. And mostly, I was very happy that I came up with this idea for when you go into the past far enough, you go into a different edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, for people who have started with 5th edition or started with 3rd edition, there's probably limited appeal in sending your characters back to 2nd edition, but it's just 1 or 2 sessions, so you might enjoy it. I think the people that enjoy it the most are the people that played 2nd edition when they were kids or teenagers and played it quite a bit and haven't forgotten how movement works. I think that those people will get the most enjoyment, the most kick out of, let's go back, send your characters back to 2nd edition, and especially because you did play 2nd edition, you used to have characters, and if you can remember your friend's old characters, then you can just create those characters again for them to play for 1 or 2 more sessions. And I think the players themselves will get a nostalgic enjoyment out of that, as will you as a dungeon master. So, to sum up, this was just a story about how I sent my PCs back in time, and because I sent them back in time, it was through editions. I used a Chrono Ghost, something that I just came up with on the fly, to facilitate that movement back in time, and that movement through editions. And my friends got to play a version of their old characters for 1 or 2 sessions and figure out a very simple plot and then get back into the main campaign. And it was enjoyable for me, despite some of the things that were less enjoyable because one character was pushing back against it, but a lot of it was enjoyable. There was these hilarious moments and these remembrances of what we played as children. So if you want to use the idea, because that's what Dungeons & Dragons is. Someone comes up with an idea, they share their idea, and if you think it's cool, you use that idea. So let me know if you're thinking of doing this, or if you've done something similar, or if you're watching this at a much later date and you're going to try it out, and you've already tried it out after watching this. Let me know how it went. So with that, I'll let you go.